Obviously, nobody's intentionally intending to spin out of their turn-based to final or trying to turn back to the runway following an engine failure. But they have communicated exactly that outcome to the airplane, and the airplane only does what we tell it to do.
G'day everyone, and welcome to episode 127 of the Flight Training Australia podcast. All across Australia and all across the globe, this is a podcast all about flight training and flying in Australia and beyond. I'm your host, Trent Robinson. G'day guys, thank you for listening. Wonderful to have you all with me and to celebrate everything that's going on in aviation at the moment. Obviously not good news for all our friends out at Bonza there. Hopefully some investors can be found and things continue on. I never got to fly with Bonza, but I've got a few mates who are flying there and think it's a great company, and it would be a real shame to have another airline showing so much promise and potential go under. But fingers crossed, something can be done there. New stats are out at the moment for the podcast, and very pleased to say still number one aviation podcast in Australia. So thank you everyone for listening and helping spread the word and keeping this podcast up there. It's driving me to keep going and keep the best content and information coming out to you guys as humanly possible. So thank you everyone for that. Even reached number 16 in Canada not so long ago, which was pretty cool. Not sure what happened there or why, but hello to everyone in Canada. And I'm sure there'll be some friends and aviators listening in America for this particular episode, because we have a very special guest with us today. My special guest today joins us with over 3 decades of experience, and award-winning flight instructor and aviation expert, devoting his life to advancing aeronautical knowledge and enhancing safety through his innovative teaching methods and extensive resources, including his Learn to Turn program and books like Stall Spin Awareness. To discuss all this and so much more, I am very pleased to welcome Rich Stowell. Rich, thank you for joining me, mate.
Thank you, Trent. It's a pleasure to meet you finally and be on here with you.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, it's been great having a bit of a chat. We've been talking the last few weeks, just getting ready for this event, which we'll talk about later on. But look, let's just get into it. We've got so much to talk about. And like I was saying to you before we started, I just don't know what not to talk about to try and keep this in a listenable time frame for everybody. But I think we're definitely going to have a follow-up chat at some point. But let's have a look at your flying career first of all. So what got you into flying?
Well, like most kids, I guess, a lot of things were going on when I was young. Most notably, Neil Armstrong stepping onto the moon with Apollo 11. And then as an early teen years, I went to my first air show in Sussex, New Jersey. And the headliner, the person who was based there, the late, great Leo Loudenslager. And he used to attract all kinds of other acts, would come to this little airport in the middle of nowhere. And I just thought that was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. And I wondered, probably out loud more than once, if I could ever learn to do that. So basically, I learned to fly when I finally made that decision to learn to do aerobatics. And I didn't care really about my solo or anything else. I was really looking forward to trying aerobatics.
Straight into it.
Straight into it.
Yeah, wow. All right. And how did that go? Did you get sick, or was it everything you sort of hoped it would be? Or?
No and yes. I did not get sick, although as a flight instructor for many years, I have had my moments letting students do things to me. And it was everything I thought it would be and more. I was very fortunate to fall in with the International Aerobatic Club crowd right away. And in fact, my first aerobatic instructor, a woman by the name of Diane Hakala, at the time was flying her single seat pits in the intermediate category of competition. She would eventually go on to become the second woman in the United States to become the U.S. National Aerobatic Champion. Of course, we all know who the first woman was, Patty Wagstaff, multiple times. So I was extremely lucky in finding, or maybe they found me, I don't really know, the right people at the right time.
Oh, look, I don't think you could have done any better.
I don't think so either.
Wonderful. All right. So how long did it sort of take? Did you really hang around the private pilot license level for a while, or did you get into your commercial soon? When did instructing sort of really catch your eye and thought, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, so the sequence really went, got my private, found aerobatics. And so I started aerobatic training probably around 85 hours of total flight time or so. Had a couple of job changes and a cross country change from East Coast, New Jersey over to California, where the flying weather is reliably better for aerobatics. And entered my first aerobatic contest in the sportsman category at 120 hours total time. I didn't know a couple of the maneuvers, and strangely enough, uh, despite my poor flying, I didn't come in last place. So, and the bug had bit at that point. And yeah, so kind of in parallel with that, I started working on my instrument and then my commercial, and had intended to get my flight instructor. Didn't know what I was going to do with it. But at the same time, a friend of mine in Santa Paula, California, decided he was going to buy the flight school, the local flight school. And he knew I was doing aerobatics, didn't know anything about whether I was capable of teaching it or not. He said, "Hey, would you like to head up the aerobatic department?" And I said, "Yeah, sure."
Of
So,
course.
of course, right? And so there were some existing programs that were absorbed when he purchased the school, and being relatively new through the private pilot training regimen, there were a lot of things that I learned in aerobatics. Said, "Hey, how come some of these things weren't taught sooner? It would have been really neat to know this or that sooner. It would have certainly opened up my understanding a lot sooner." And so I sort of went in with that mindset to put together the program, and started teaching it. Probably, I think it was about 8 months or so after he bought the flight school and went into business on his own. And interestingly enough, you could probably only do this in the U.S. As you know, there's no separate aerobatic instructor rating or anything like that in the U.S. In fact, for the first year, I apprenticed as a flight instructor. I taught for one full year aerobatics and spin training and all of that, using my commercial license. So I could get paid for it. I wasn't endorsing anybody for anything. I wasn't making any FAA required sign-offs, and I was able to get paid for it.
Yeah,
So
right. Is that still the case now?
uh, insurance companies won't allow it. So that the bottom line was the insurance company at the flight school said, "Yeah, it's time you get your CFI," which I had intended to do. It's just the timing had worked out backwards.
Yeah, but there
And
is a
so
aerobatic training endorsement now for instructors.
no, no,
No,
still no.
still in America.
Yeah,
Wow, that's
right.
amazing. Because there
Yeah.
obviously
So
there is here. We've got the spinning approval, which is a flight activity, and aerobatics, which is a flight activity, and then low level stemming from that. So yeah, I'm really surprised that
it is
that's not a
surprising.
thing.
So oddly enough, if you ask the question, at least in the States, can a private pilot teach aerobatics? And the answer is yes. They just can't get paid for it. A commercial pilot can teach aerobatics and get paid for it. A flight instructor can teach aerobatics, get paid for it, and make the FAA endorsements.
Wow.
It's weird, I know.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. And I thought we were backwards sometimes with things, but no, that's interesting. Okay. And so with that aerobatic stuff, obviously you got to get into a few different aircraft and that sort of thing. So what would be one of your favorites that aerobatic wise that you've flown and you think is a great trainer as well as just a high performance sort of machine, does the job right?
Sure. Sure. So I'll answer it a couple of ways. First of all, I'm not an airplane snob. Flying is flying for me. It's all just a different matter of degree, isn't it? But from an aerobatic training standpoint, I really like the decathlon. Part of that might be because was the first aerobatic airplane I ever flew, but also just over the years, it's not a quantum leap in performance from a pilot coming out of a Cessna 172. There's still some catch up and everything else, but it's not the leap from a 172 to an extra 300. And you do have to work at it, and you do have to become good at manipulating the controls throughout the maneuvers, because frankly, they take longer than they do in an extra 300. From there, I did with a friend of mine. We bought in on a single seat Pitts, and that was pretty amazing, pretty incredible. So I think probably cost per pound or cost per performance, it's pretty hard to beat a Pitts. But then now you have the higher performance monoplanes like the extras and things like that. And boy, they're really good at what they do. So you just have to bring I think, a different mindset to each of those. And, but I enjoy flying them all.
Well, that's it. They're all fit for purpose. I mean, I started out on a 152 Aerobat. So that was, like you were saying before, as far as just trying to pole it around the sky, you could do things. But then for energy management, to really get every little bit out of it and actually convert one maneuver into regaining some height and doing another and putting sequences together, I thought it was really great base level for things. But yeah, moving on to chipmunks, tiger moths, and then the Super Decathlon, amongst many others, and the extra. I love the Super D. I think they're just a fantastic aeroplane. Inverted fuel tank finally, so you could sort of hang there for a bit longer rather than having to roll out quickly before the engine coughed.
Right, right.
And is
Yeah,
your one a fixed pitch, or was it CSU?
uh, the flight school had two variants. We had the 150 horse fixed pitch decathlon, which I have a lot of time in, and also the super decathlon, which has the 180 constant speed. And the decathlon that I owned for a while was 180 super decathlon with the constant speed prop. Um, they both bring something a little bit different to the equation, right? With the fixed pitch, yeah, energy management, but more importantly, throttle management, right? Which, at least in the constant speed prop airplane, you can essentially set it, forget it until it's time to do a spin or recover from a botched maneuver or land the airplane.
Yeah. Right. And what were you doing before this sort of flying career? Kind of, like, it almost sounds like it found you, doesn't it?
In some ways, yes. And I tell people I'm a recovering mechanical engineer. I graduated college and got my first job, and I think because I refused to follow my bliss, which I thought might have had something to do with flying. My punishment was to have to work at a firm with a Park Avenue address in New York City, in downtown Manhattan, but 3 floors underground. So I never saw the light of day, never saw the sky. And eventually I said, yeah, I can't do this for the next however many decades. And when I finally made the decision, I quit my job. My parents had moved to Florida at that time, so I lived with them for 2 months, and I flew almost every day till I got my private. And
Yeah,
then
nice.
everything I did after that was centered around or for the purpose of flying. I even drove when I started my aerobatic training to supplement that training. I would do my engineering job during the day, which was low-tech aerodynamics, designing heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems for office buildings. But to supplement my aerobatic training, I drove limousines at night.
The original Uber.
Whatever it takes, whatever it takes.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, obviously aerobatics really took, you really took to it and became fascinated about it. So what then started the interest in moving into this sort of, specialist area that you've really sort of found yourself in now and become known for, which is your stalling aerobatics and UPRT?
Yeah. So prior to learning to fly, I thought I had a plan and I had all these goals and everything else. And uh, when that all turned upside down, uh, basically I entered flying without too much of a thought about long-term plans or anything like that. So as you mentioned earlier, a lot of it found me, and it was happenstance, serendipity. And so what happened when my friend asked me to head up the aerobatic department? Like I said, there were a couple of existing programs, and I saw that there was this gap between primary training and aerobatic training, that there's a lot of information that should be known sooner, would expand a pilot's understanding, certainly, and then elements from aerobatic training that could fill the gaps for pilots who want to get back in their Cessna 172 and feel more comfortable, more confident, know where the edges of the envelope really are, and be able to handle some loss of control scenario in the airplane. So I drew on that to sort of fill in the blanks, really, right? So I would say for all of the people who want to take the training, probably only 10% of them will continue on to the aerobatic portion of it. Most of them want to take the spin and the upset recovery part of it, the simulated loss of control scenario part of it, and then get back in the airplanes that they're going to be flying every day. And so I was really excited about experimenting with it, because that's really what it ended up being, is experimenting, listening, getting feedback from the trainees, what works, what doesn't work. Oftentimes, if they would ask me a question I didn't know the answer, I said, well, let's go try it, right? And so a lot of it came from that. And I guess you would say, well, I guess I found my niche. I fell into it totally by accident. And I've been enjoying it ever since, and doing everything I can not to have to get a real job again.
That's what it's all about, isn't it? And look, I think you've certainly succeeded in that. I know I couldn't remember when I first came across your content and material, but I've definitely known your name for a long time. And like I said, it's kind of really cool to be sitting here talking to you now about it all, and just real privilege to be talking about this concept. But I don't know how I'm going to contain all this. So let's not waffle. Let's get into it. And so first of all, before we start talking about some stalls and spins and things, what's the difference between these? There's a few terms out there now with aerobatics and then EMT, UPRT, loss of control in flight, that sort of stuff. So what's all that about, first of all, for those that aren't really familiar?
Sure. So some of it is a historical component to it. So if you were to read Wolfgang Langewies's book Stick and Rudder, he talks even then, back in the 40s, that loss of control was the number one cause of fatal accidents. And so loss of control has been with us since the Wright brothers did their first flight. And in fact, the real legacy of the Wright brothers is they gave us controllable flight, and we've been finding ways to lose that control for more than 100 years. And so at least that terminology has been around for a long time. It's just taken a while before, at least here in the States, the FAA has pinpointed it and targeted as a focus area during training. So we do talk about loss of control in flight as the top fatal accident category in general aviation, and it's been that way historically. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, loss of control in flight, fatal loss of control in flight outnumbers controlled flight into terrain by almost a factor of 3 to 1. So the next several categories aren't even close. And so we're starting to at least incorporate loss of control language in these last 15 years or so as a more common usage of terminology, even though it's been around forever. In terms of emergency maneuver training, which is what I call my program and have since 1987, back then you have a lot of different names for essentially the same thing. It can be all attitude training, upset training. It can be unusual attitudes, sort of umbrella terms that cover things like losing control after you stall an airplane, stall spin, rolling upsets, things of that nature. And the UPRT, the upset prevention recovery training language, didn't really start to come into vogue, I would say, until this century, which is sort of still weird to say, even though we're 24 years into it. The Boeing and several other large airplane manufacturers got together and put together their loss of control package. I think it started somewhere in mid to later 1990s. And so basically that's become a more common terminology now, UPRT, mostly because ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization, has published a document covering that. And so it's more common now just because the airline industry is talking about it, and it's trickling down certainly into general aviation. So what I say about the emergency maneuver training program, which is I've been teaching and others have been teaching as well since 1987, we call it the original UPRT program. But what they have in common is they are not aerobatic training. So again, it's that gap filler. It's how do you take people who are flying non-aerobatic airplanes and broaden their understanding, their knowledge base, their experience base, their skill base, to know where the edges of the envelope are, to have more confidence, more competence, and to frankly just take the novelty off of those scary edges, right? So that the first time they see it isn't the last time. They've done it in a training environment. And so we might think that aerobatic instructors are automatically UPRT or EMT, emergency maneuver training instructors, and that's not the case. The best way to think about UPRT versus aerobatics, in aerobatic training, you're taught to do the maneuvers perfectly. In UPRT, you're taught to recover from maneuvers that are botched all the time. So we're not trying to do them perfectly. We're trying to recover from botched maneuvers or scenarios that lead us to losing control of the airplane.
Yeah, I used to say that to my aerobatic students is, some of the most fun we can have is fixing the ones that you stuff up and, doing the if in doubt roll out rather than pulling out and losing height and V&E and scaring the hell out of yourself. So,
Right. Right. I tell everybody, anybody can do the maneuver well. It's what happens when it doesn't go well, right?
No,
That's when it counts.
That's right. All right. Well, like I said, let's get into the good stuff here. So there are a stack of myths there about stalling, and I know again from our recent chats, but just over the years, when I ask somebody, why does an aeroplane stall, the number of answers you get are far and wide, and obviously there's the theory behind it, but then there's also the practical. So I'll say, so when do we know the airplane's stalled? And they'll say, oh, when the stall warning goes. I go, no, that's a pre-stall. What about when the buffet? No, that's pre-stall too. And usually we eventually work our way to the answer of the nose is going to drop. And I go, okay, well, let's see what happens. And of course, we're typically in a Cessna or something like that, a highly stable aircraft. And they're waiting for the nose to drop, and then they've realized we've lost 1,000 feet already. We've been sinking for the last while, and go, okay, how's that nose drop for you? What have you sort of seen there, and how do we get people to sort of understand from a flight school perspective? Because ultimately that's where it's either being taught properly or not being taught properly. But this whole thing about critical angle attack and its relationship with airspeed. Very
Sure.
loaded question.
And it is. And of course, the most common and correct answer to most questions in aviation is it depends, right? So you had a perfect example. Take a 172 where you've got your forward center of gravity and you're well forward in the utility part of the envelope. And try as you might, you probably can't get the nose drop in the classic stall behavior. But then put 4 people in the airplane, load it more aft, do exactly the same thing, and you'll get a little different response. Maybe not even a little different, but a lot different response. And so on one hand, there's that funny quirk in the definition of stall, at least with the FAA, and that is, either the classic nose drop, separation of airflow, or you run out of elevator authority, right? And so typically that would be at the forward end. That might happen, which is what you were describing. You're losing altitude, even though you don't have that classic stall brake. And so the other piece of that is, even though we are supposed to train our pilots to the correlation level of learning and really making problem solvers and not people who can just regurgitate, stock answers back to us. Most of our training is designed around the basic stalls, the couple of stalls that are going to get them to pass the check ride. And unfortunately, it reinforces that it's a negative reinforcement that, well, the only time I've ever experienced the stall, even though they can tell you any attitude, any airspeed, the only practical experience they have is at one attitude and one speed. And so it's a bit of what we call a training scar, right? We believe that that's when it's going to happen. And that's the only place it can happen, even though intellectually or at the rote level, we can say any attitude, any airspeed. And so we really just need to kind of break away from that as best we can and show cases where it can stall in other attitudes and other airspeeds to kind of round out the thing that we tell them to recite back when the examiner asks them the question. Because otherwise, they're either going to ignore the warning signs in a different scenario, or maybe they believe if they just fly that final approach 10 knots faster, they're safe from the stall. But the problem is they're going to float longer down the runway and have potentially an overrun situation, right? And so things just keep compounding that way. And if you were to ask a group of pilots, if you were to throw out the question, what's the stall speed in your airplane? Every single one of us will have a number pop into our head.
Yep.
And that's an artifact from our training, even though it could be any speed, right? The answer is it depends.
Yep.
And so, yeah, there's a whole issue around, well, how do we broaden the practical experience to match what we make them memorize, any attitude, any speed.
Yeah. It is a fascinating thing, and just from the stall recovery process, Paul and I, when we talked to Paul Strike a few episodes ago, we were talking about stall stick position and just the concept of how that works and the importance of it in recovery, because we'll often get minimum height loss is the idea, but the typical full power ease forward, prevent your sort of aero club style recovery, I'll call it. We end up losing 200, 300, 400 feet, and we can recover the nose with the nose still above the horizon, especially if you've got an aircraft that has a good power weight ratio as well. But most training aircraft will do that, won't they?
They will. And you bring up an interesting point that somehow, somewhere along the line, things have evolved to, we have to save altitude. We have to minimize height loss, right? And the FAA has started to move a little bit further away from that and say, look, the most important thing is it doesn't matter what else you do if you don't reattach the airflow to the wing, right? If it is a true stall scenario. And so a question I'll ask people in seminars, I say, all right, imagine yourself 300 feet above the ground and you stall the airplane. How much altitude can you afford to give away? And people will say, oh, no altitude, 1 foot. The reality is you can afford to give away 299 feet of it to recapture the airflow on the wing so that you have the opportunity to do something in that last foot that's useful, right? But, and if you think about this, the typical light single engine airplanes, when you add power, is that counterproductive or productive in terms of lowering the angle of attack? What's the most important thing that we're trying to do? Reduce the angle of attack, right? And take a 172 and have it, 4 people on board and the CG a little bit more aft, and you add the power in, it pitches the airplane the wrong way in terms of angle of attack, right? So I think we just need to come back to, well, what's the primary objective, right? What are we trying to accomplish? And then the other things that we can start to roll in when we get good at the main thing, we can start adding in the other things to do other things for us, like minimize altitude loss and make sure that we're not that we're canceling the yaw and everything else. So I think we just need to get back to what's the most important thing we're trying to accomplish here. That if we don't get it done, nothing else we do is really going to matter.
And what do you put more importance on, the stall recovery or stall prevention?
In the real world, of course, we have our 3 prongs, right? We have awareness, prevention, recovery. If we're in recovery, it's probably a dire situation, and our opportunities, we're backed really into a corner by then. And so, yes, we do need the prevention part of it, and that comes from the awareness part of it, right? So we want to train all 3, but we need to keep moving back one step and say, all right, now that you know how to recover, let's do some prevention exercises. Now that you know how to prevent, where's our awareness, right? And as you know, flying with pilots, what happens to awareness when we start to get stressed? Well, the awareness goes down, right? We start to get that tunnel vision. And then it becomes a little harder to be aware and maybe a little bit more difficult to prevent. And then if it goes far enough along, we're in a recovery mode, but typically by then it's probably too late, right? So it's one thing to know how to recover from a spin, and it's a useful exercise for several different reasons. But if you're relying on that to the exclusion of awareness and prevention, you've already hit the ground, right? 90+% of accidental stall spins occur below 1,000 feet. It's too late. But the real question is, when was the last time you heard of a highly experienced NASA test pilot spinning in the traffic pattern? Right? It doesn't happen to them. Well, why is that? Well, they've done it enough. They know what it takes to get there. And so maybe their awareness and comfort level and everything else is such that they're not getting anywhere near that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of control flight terrain issues or accidents in the HSB website. I know the NTSB is full of them. There's a bunch of YouTube videos and that sort of thing. And like we say, when we're doing stall training, a lot of it happens straight and level, nice, controlled and stable. But the real threat is really that either turn onto final, which is funnily enough a nose down where you think airspeed preservation is going to be okay, angle of bank's not going to be that much. But I've seen even jets do this and spiral into the ground. What do you think is the biggest risk in which phase of flight do you think where pilots that sort of aren't really equipped for this are most exposed?
Yeah, so it's the classic big three, right? It's takeoff and initial climb, approach and landing. So we lump takeoff and initial climb together as a group, approach and landing as a group, and then maneuvering flight. Those are the big three. So if you drill down into the loss of control category, 64 or 5%, roughly 2/3 of the accidents, fatal accidents, occur in those phases of flight. So again, goes back to 1944 in with Wolfgang Langewiesche. He said, pilots don't know how to turn airplanes, and that's where we get into trouble. And how often are we maneuvering an airplane? Well, a lot when we're flying in and around a traffic pattern where things are absolutely at their most critical, right? I don't know of any stall accidents that occur with the airplane configured for a check ride stall. What are the pilots doing? Exactly what you said. They're maneuvering, they're turning,
Yeah.
multiple configuration changes. They're already at a reduced margin to the critical angle of attack. They have multiple opportunities for distraction. They're doing configuration changes with the airplane, close proximity with other aircraft and the ground. Our margins for error are a lot smaller there.
All right, so let's talk about turning because it's really quite a fascinating thing. It's generally just used to change direction, but there can be so much more with it, especially considering, like we said, most of the maneuvers or the stalls occur in a turning phase of flight. And I've just watched, like I said, this, I think it was a Challenger jet turning final. They lost it, stalled and crashed. There's been several others through distraction. There was a Mooney in America not that long ago where the door came open and it looks like they probably did exactly the same thing, trying to shut the door and maybe doing a bit of a side slip or something to try and shut the door and save themselves a landing and keep going, and lost it in the turn. Um, when we teach medium turns, we're talking about bank balance and back pressure. And back pressure is typically to recover the loss in vertical component of lift. However, there's actually quite a bit more to it, isn't there? It's doing more than we think.
A lot more. And one of the issues we have is that instructors don't really drill down enough and identify exactly what each of the controls are doing. And by not doing that and not reinforcing it during the actual training of turns and things like that, is pilots, when they start to get stressed, perhaps they're overshooting that base to final. And for whatever reason, they feel compelled that they have to get back to the runway instead of, well, level the wings and go around and set it up better the next time. That's a safe option in most cases. So here's the pilot banked. Like you say, the nose might be down a little bit. Somebody at some point, maybe even a flight organization, a big organization, said never exceed X number of degrees of bank in the traffic pattern. And so here's the pilot in this overshot turn that they're going to continue to do regardless. And well, I can't increase my bank because somebody told me not to do that. Um, well, I'll just use the rudder to bring the nose around and tighten the turn. Well, as we know, anybody who's taken spin training, you ask them, well, what was one of the key things you did to make the airplane spin? They'll say they added the rudder. And so here's the pilot in this bank feeding in the bottom rudder toward the ground. Well, flying is like walking. The airplane goes where you step. And so as soon as you step on that rudder, the nose of the airplane starts slicing down from the horizon. What's your natural instinct, the human instinct, when you're in a bank close to the ground and the nose, perceive the nose dropping through the horizon even more? You're going to pull back. So what does that do? Well, it increases the G, it decreases the speed, increases the angle of attack. So now we're in a critical situation where you have yaw and you have the potential to stall. And if those two things coexist, the airplane's going to depart into a spin. And that's purely miscommunication between the pilot and the airplane. And quite simply, if you go back, fundamentally, it's as simple as it can be. So flying is simple, but not easy, right? And so from a basic object motion standpoint, things only move in two ways. It's either a straight line or a circle. The straight line can, we call them level climbing or descending lines, right? In flying. And then we have circle. We got a lot of different ways we describe circle. We can call it a round out for landing. We can call it a loop. We can call it a horizontal turn, right? We can call it a lot of things, a chandelle that happens out in the oblique plane. And so what is the common thing that determines whether the airplane goes on a straight line or in a circle? Well, it's what we do with the elevator. And unless we understand what the role of the elevator is for us, take that 30-degree bank turn again. And let's assume an airplane with whatever energy, airplane's capable of any maneuver. It has whatever energy you need at the moment. And the pilot is also capable of performing any maneuver as well. So in this instant, you're at 30 degrees of bank, whatever energy you need, you got. How many different kinds of turns can you do? Okay, everybody right away goes two-dimensional, a level turn. Okay, fine. How about a loop tilted 30 degrees from the horizon? How about an outside loop tilted 30 degrees from the horizon? How about an Immelman that starts at 30 degrees of bank? How about a rolling turn? How about an outside rolling turn? All started with the same angle of bank. The difference is, primary difference is what the pilot chose to do, given their energy at the moment with the elevator. And I think there are exercises that we teach that come from the aerobatic environment, that if you teach it, the turns in a kind of an exploded view, this input followed by this input followed by this input, the pilot can see what each of the controls does. And if you teach it in that way, you can actually teach pilots how to do steep turns and they'll never fall out of a turn again. But we don't do that in the primary training. We just sort of make it this nebulous, oh, you do this and this and guess what happens, right? But we might be able to get away with that in a simple medium bank turn, but you go to 60 degrees of bank and you better know what the controls are doing, right? Or it's not going to work out for you.
Yeah, and I think that's what leads up to a lot of this confusion of, we talk about steep turns and stall speed increases, but as exactly like you're saying there, I ask people, well, can we do a 45-degree climbing turn after takeoff? Oh, no, you can't do that because we're going to stall. And go, well, are we going to stall? Why does an airplane stall? Is it the speed? No, it's because you're pulling back so hard that you're going to breach that angle of attack. And so we eventually can get to that, but I think there's still a lot of confusion as well, is what angle of attack actually is, because as we were just talking about there, we're going to go do a loop, but the angle of attack is based on the relative airflow approaching the wing, and the relative airflow isn't parallel to the horizon. It's constantly changing and pitching up with us, isn't it? So it's that constant relationship. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So again, that's an artifact from our primary training, which for a lot of our primary training happens in a two-dimensional plane, doesn't it? And so we start to relate the relative wind to the horizon because a lot of what we're doing is in that flat two-dimensional plane. But like you said, once we start moving out of that plane, the relative wind is a function of the angle of attack is a function of where's the wind coming from versus where basically is the chord line pointing in the airplane. And it's that differential. And depending on how hard I pull or not pull, if the relative wind continues to follow the wing around a loop, for example, the angle of attack doesn't have to exceed critical at all, right? We know we can do that. But if I pull hard enough G, so it's really the combination of speed and G load that determine our proximity to the stall, right? So if I'm at 1G, I can give you a stall speed that goes with that. If we're at 2Gs, well, there's a different stall speed that goes with that. And one of the awareness aspects is becoming a little bit more familiar with correlating what we call GQing, becoming aware of what am I asking the airplane to do in terms of how I feel versus what is the speed doing, right? So it's those two things that point to what is the angle of attack, regardless of the attitude of the airplane. And so if the speed is going down, the G load has to go down. If the speed is going up, you can tolerate increasing the G up to a certain point, right? But if those trends are diverging, if the speed is going down, but your G is going up, guess what? Guess where that's going to meet?
Yep.
Somewhere on not a stall point, but a stall curve, right? That could be the 1G stall speed. It could be the 2G stall speed. It could be, I've encountered stall buffet on the backside of a loop with the nose, about probably 30 to 40 degrees below the horizon at 120 knots. And the one case was an airline pilot flying an RV-8, and we're doing a loop, and on the backside, with the nose 30 or 40 degrees down, the airplane starts buffeting. And he looks back at me. I'm sitting behind him. He looks back at me and goes, "What's that?" And I ask him, I said, "You tell me what that is." And his airspeed indicator is 120 knots. Stalled the airplane, accelerated stall on the backside of a loop with the nose well down below the horizon. It's the G speed combination that really tell us what is that relationship between the relative wind and the wing. And because we can't see that, right, we have to imagine it. And in most primary training, we don't imagine it anywhere but in the horizontal.
Yeah. I think I often, just talking about unloading wings and breaking the stall and stall stick position sort of concepts, I often use the Matt Hall incident in the Rebel Air Race, where he's in the turn and he looked to where he wanted to go and then stalled it, just broke it forward, just nudged it forward, kissed the water and pulled away. And just such a great example of the difference of if you did the traditional, really break it forward to get excessive nose down and everything else, he would have been a submarine.
Yes, sure. And I actually witnessed a accelerated stall spin departure out of a 360-degree high G turn at an air show in Santa Paula back in the early 90s. Pilot was flying a Bearcoot, and the pilot was ex-Navy, test pilot had flown this Bearcoot at air shows before, an American airline pilot. The last maneuver in his whole sequence was a 360 degrees, basically 360 degree. He called it an 8G turn in this Bearcoot, which is it's a canard airplane, right? You wouldn't think, well, canards are supposed to not do certain things, right? And he stalled, and it rolled under and went into the riverbed and killed him. And kind of replaying it back earlier, you could see he was pulling so hard on a lot of the vertical maneuvers that you could see the airplane wobbling as it was approaching the vertical, in and out of stall buffet. And it's like, we don't have to pull that hard at air shows. So I was eye level with it. I was on the flatbed trailer at show center calling the maneuvers to the air show announcer. So I had a front row seat to that. That was the first loss of control accident I had ever witnessed, and that was early 1990s.
No, it is. It's tragic, and it we've seen so many air show incidents. The F-16 Thunderbirds one, the classic one there, where he's miscalculated, stalled, and nearly hit the ground and ejected. There's plenty at shows through America, Europe, where these things have happened. Now, that's not really affecting most pilots, though, is it? So, is it more the distractions and things in a circuit or whatever else you think that are resulting in pilots losing? Like, I just watched a reel this morning on Instagram of the 172. Looks like it's just taken off, maybe a go around. It's hard to tell. It doesn't have the bit before it, but it's just wafted and then dropped the left wing and gone in. And that was on a flight review with an instructor, apparently.
Sure. So the sad news is, if we go back to student pilots, there's kind of good news, bad news. Student pilots tend to have the lowest stall spin accident rate, even compared to airline transport pilots. But you put an instructor on board, they're more likely to have a stall spin accident with the instructor on board than they are when they're solo. So that kind of tells us something about what's going on in that dual environment, A, but also B, the perhaps lack of total experience and competence of flight instructors near critical angle attack as well. But yes, just distraction is a big factor, but also just plain miscommunicating with the airplane, not really knowing. Obviously nobody's intentionally intending to spin out of their turn-based to final or trying to turn back to the runway following an engine failure, but they have communicated exactly that outcome to the airplane, and the airplane only does what we tell it to do. So one of the questions is, A, are you allowing distraction to influence how you're flying the airplane? And B, how are you trying to communicate with the airplane? And how do we make the pilot a better communicator in terms of what they want the airplane to do.
Mm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? So coming sort of back to the learn to turn and everything else with you ask the question, which control surface turns the airplane, and naturally everyone thinks aileron or rudder, but it really is the elevator. And if anyone plays flight simulator or plays or uses, I think it's most apparent there, especially I remember doing the Top Gun Maverick thing in the F-18 there, and you're trying to fly the valley, but if you just roll, it just does that. It just rolls around the longitudinal axis and sits there. You have to pull it to actually make it turn. And, our aircraft are no different, are they?
They are no different. And of course, at the shallow banks, the amount of back pressure it takes is unnoticeable to us. There's something called there's a certain dead band in our ability to sense changes in G load. And it's not until you start getting into steeper banks where it becomes more apparent. And so if most of our training is in a range where it appears as if it's the ailerons turning the airplane because we don't even recognize the need for back pressure. One simple way to show that is to say, all right, well, what happens if I roll the airplane to 30 degrees of bank and just let go? What happens, right? And the answer is it depends. And what does it depend on? It depends where I've set the trim, the elevator trim. What if I roll to 30 degrees of bank, but I have the elevator trimmed full nose down? I'm going to get a totally different kind of turn, right? Including hitting my head on the headliner, than if I have it trimmed, say, neutral or trimmed aft of neutral, right? The decathlon is a great example. You can do an entire loop in the decathlon just with the trim. That's how powerful the trim is, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so unless we really try to expand and say, hey, look, we're working here and it's hard to tell, but this is what's really going on, right? And of course, the FAA answer is horizontal component of lift. I mean, I trained my granddaughter, who's 6 years old, to be able to recite horizontal component of lift. What learning is that, right? That's just rote learning. Anybody can spew that out. But who manipulates the magnitude and which side of the wing that horizontal component of lift comes out of? You do, by pulling or pushing on the elevator.
That's right. Direct relationship.
And so you can do an outside turn in the right airplane, in the right, under the right conditions. Well, how is that? How do you do that? And I've done some experiments with non-pilots. In fact, high school kids, give them model airplanes. We talk about roll, yaw, pitch and lines and circles and let them play with it. And then I'll have them come up to the front of the classroom and I'll describe some kind of flight path I want the airplane to follow. And they have to sort of describe what they're doing with the controls. And oddly enough, they can manipulate these balsa model airplanes better than a lot of flight instructors can. If I were to give flight instructors a model airplane and say, show me what the controls look like when you're doing this or that or the other thing, they don't want to have anything to do with that. That goes to the visualization part, right? We've got to be able to visualize things when we're flying an airplane.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, wow. All right. Spinning. I've done some spins in my time, but I don't think I can meet 35,000 plus.
The key number there, Trent, is the number of recoveries equals the number of entries. That's the most important ratio.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk about spinning. I know it is something that a lot of people haven't done. It's a topic we're talking about here with how it's been in and out of the syllabus. We struggle to get suitable aeroplanes at flight schools. So then we're sort of shying away to more wing drop stalls, which looks like an incipient spin, which can be a completely different recovery and all that. But let's just stick with the fully developed spins. And again, you've really taken a bit of an key interest in this, and people will be again used to an aero club style recovery technique of take the power off, ease forward, opposite rudder. But as you evolve, there's other methods like Nav Bags and of course the pair recovery, which you had quite direct involvement with developing. So you want to take us through what the spin is and how the pair recovery came about?
Sure. So before I even started flight training, I was at work. There was happened to be somebody several drafting tables away from me who turns out was a B-17 pilot in World War II. And so we would talk about flying on occasion, and he would typically end our little talks by saying, "Make sure you get spin training." So very early on, before he even got in an airplane, this pilot was recommending, right? So it was always on my mind. And as I started to learn about spins for the competition side of things, and then how do we transition that to, training accidental spin and recoveries, and interacting with test pilots and the folks at NASA who through the late 70s, early 80s did 10,000 different spin turns in multiple different configurations of typical light GA airplanes. I got to know the chief test pilot there, Jim Patton, fairly well, and really just started digging into all of this. And there are a lot of different techniques over the years that have been used to recover airplanes from spins. So I guess the real question is, where does it all come from, and who does it apply to, right? What kind of airplanes does it apply to? And back in 1936, NACA, which was the forerunner to NASA, conducted a series of spin tests, and they came up with, at the time, NACA standard spin recovery for upright spins. And the NASA program in the late 70s, early 80s wanted to confirm that that was still valid, and they did. And so PARE is just an acronym. That's all it is, that points to the NASA standard spin recovery procedure, right? So it's not really new. It's just a mental checklist that a pilot can use that allows them to follow NASA standard spin recovery. And in fact, I did a survey of test pilots who spin general aviation light airplanes and asked them a lot of different questions, even advisory circulars on the flight test requirements for light airplanes. States in there use NASA standard spin recovery unless the manufacturer finds the need to do something else. And they don't really define what that something else is, but it's pretty rare that you'll find something that truly deviates from NASA standard. It might not necessarily be in the correct order. That's a whole other issue, but the elements are there. It's pretty rare that you're going to find a spin recovery procedure that says add full power, apply full opposite aileron, shove the elevator forward, and continue to hold the rudder in the direction you're going. That's exactly how airshow pilots do those really flat accelerated spins at air shows, right? And do you really want to do that
Absolutely.
in an airplane that's not going to recover? So there really are only certain things that are favorable towards spin recovery. And unfortunately, what happened in the 80s, Eric Mueller, European Swiss pilot, and Gene Beggs here in the States kind of picked up from Eric's work. They experimented with the Beggs-Mueller or Beggs method. And I'll go through PARE and then I'll go through the Beggs method as it's actually published by Gene Beggs. And you tell me what the difference is. Step 1 of PARE, power off. Step 1 of Beggs, hands off, power off. Is that a hands off action? No. Same thing. The A in PARE, ailerons to neutral. In Beggs, hands off, completely off the stick. What do you think happens in an airplane when you do that in a spin? The ailerons, wherever they were, they'll go, essentially, they'll float slightly in spin. Then you go full opposite rudder, PAR, rudder, full opposite. Beggs method, powers off, let go of the stick, rudder, full opposite. That's not a hands-off action, right? And then the E in PARE is elevator. Let's assume it's an upright spin. Push forward however far it takes until recovery is effected, right? It could be as little as a half an inch. It could be all the way forward. It depends. Well, in the Beggs method, when you let go of the stick, not only does the aileron go slightly in spin, but wherever the elevator was, it goes just slightly aft of neutral. And the interesting thing is, after you go power off ailerons and you let go in Beggs method, after you step on the opposite rudder, sometime after you step on the opposite rudder, where does the stick go? It goes exactly where you would have done it if you did the hands-on PARE. Are they incompatible? No, they're
Mm,
accomplishing aerodynamically the same thing. Just in one case, NASA standard, the pilot is doing the 4 actions. In Bags is the pilot's doing 2 of the actions, the power and the rudder, and letting aerodynamics take care of the aileron and the elevator. The caveat is that it only works in certain airplanes. In airplanes that typically tend to be high
yes.
performance and have extremely powerful rudder, which is not most of the light airplanes that we're flying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and that was obviously the first time I came across that in the extra, and I guess being an upright inverted aircraft, the sort of I guess the sale of using the Beggs Miller recovery technique was just push the rudder. It didn't really matter whichever rudder's sticking out at you, push the rudder, and you don't have to identify which way you're going.
Sure.
So I guess that's what really made that one kind of attractive to some people.
Right. And so that whole thing got published in aviation magazines, and next thing you know, everybody says, "Oh, this is all we have to do, just let go." And so uh, it got taken out of context, and Gene Beggs followed up. He wrote a booklet on that Beggs method, and in the booklet he talks about airplanes that it doesn't work in. He got a phone call from the late great Bill Kirshner, who, when he was alive, you could ask him any question about how spins behave in any of the Cessna 150s, 152 aerobats, right? He was the man on
I was going to
that.
say the very airplane behind you is one
That's
that doesn't
exactly
work.
right. And if you look closely at it, you'll see the rudder's hard over and the elevator's back. It is a spin entry. It's not the top of a loop. But anyway, Kirshner called Gene Beggs one day and said, I'm not sure if I'm doing your, power off, hands off, opposite rudder because my airplane doesn't seem to be recovering. And Gene asked him, well, how long are you waiting? And Kirshner goes, oh, about 10 turns. so so we know it doesn't work even in an airplane as basic as a Cessna 152. It does not work in the decathlon from an inverted spin. There was a tragic spin accident involving a low time decathlon pilot who had experience with Beggs hands off method in a pits, teaching a commercial pilot in a decathlon here in Oregon, just one state over. They got to the point where the front seater, the commercial pilot, bailed out, got rid of the door, rolled out on the wing because it was an inverted spin, bounced off the wing, pulled the ripcord, swung once under the canopy and hit the ground. The instructor did not get out. I had the opportunity, and this was an extremely brave individual. The commercial pilot in the front seat came to fly with me after that. And we went up in the decathlon and did a whole bunch of inverted spins. I thought he was extremely brave to do that. But we just did the standard recovery, and the airplane behaves just fine. So it's the wrong technique applied to the wrong airplane, the wrong spin in the wrong airplane. So from a spin training standpoint, we need to start with the broadest applicable procedure and then branch to special cases, not the other way around, right? Same way as showing people a stall in the special case of a check ride wings level power off, right? And never doing the others and thinking that that's the only time it can ever happen. So, we need to start broad and then show special cases and maybe why a published procedure might look a little bit different from the standard case.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the interesting things with the stalling discussion on that reel I posted the other day. And everyone in aviation often likes to try and just have a one size fits all approach to things. And it just can't happen. There's just so many variables, so many design characteristics and all that stuff, not even including pilot reaction and delay in response and people thinking they're pushing the rudder when no, you're not. This is full rudder. I'm sure you've seen it countless times over. And like you said, the only time I ever get sick in aerobatics is when I've got in the back and someone else is swinging me around all over the place.
Right.
Uncoordinated.
Right. Yeah. Interesting point. There's a difference in spin recovery training. There's a difference between pushing the rudder hard and pushing the rudder far. Those are not the same thing. Oftentimes when trainees tell me, I'm pushing the rudder as hard as I can, I say, put your other foot flat on the floor and now show me, right? They're fighting one leg against the other. And that's, as you know, right? When pilots get tense, the first place it shows up is in their legs, and then it moves up
Yep.
into the rest of their body, right? So they disconnect from what their feet are doing, or they'll
Oh,
tell you
for sure.
something
Yeah.
and it's not true, right? Their perception is not correct. And talking about one of the things that's really cool about light airplane flying is the breadth of different types of airplanes we can fly. I have a friend of mine in his hangar. He's got an N3N, he's got a Husky, and he's got an RV8. You talk about all three tailwheel, but totally different performance, right? Not just in speed wise, but in control authorities, right? And he's talking about, well, what if I fly the N3N in the morning and then I jump into the RV8 after lunch, right? He's got to recalibrate to totally different, even though he's capable of flying all of these different kinds of airplanes, as are any of us, but we've got to recalibrate because it's a matter of degree, isn't it? And how much further we have to be ahead in something like an RV8 than, say, a J3 Cub.
Yeah. So, and that's great because that leads to the point I wanted to come back to with the accident rates with instructors on board. Now, I am the same. I could be. I remember one day I flew the Tiger Moth, a 152, a 172, a Mooney, and a Cessna 310 twin. Um, Massive range, and this is what I'm always talking about, and especially when I talk to instructors, you're going to start off on one aeroplane, so you kind of like a private pilot in that you're almost a type specialist, but then you start to spread out and fly these different aircraft and different characteristics. I was flying a Caravan the other day and then back into the 172 at night, and then in a Cherokee 6, and totally different characteristics, dynamics, visibility, horizons, control inputs, all these things. Do you think that's what's catching instructors out a little bit, that, or is it because they're going out of the normal flight realm and pushing into some of these others, and because they're not flying themselves, they are losing their skills and their hands-on recognition of things, and then the ability to take over quickly and fix something?
Yeah, that's you've hit on all of the points I was going to respond with, and yes, as instructors, if we're doing our job, we're not really flying. We're not flying the airplanes. We're maintaining our currency essentially through osmosis, right? So we do lose our fine motor skill part of it because we're not doing it to the extent that our students, our trainees should be. So there is that. And then we have this opportunity where we might be in a single day flying multiple different types of airplanes with different characteristics. And we cannot be current in 100% current and competent in 100% of the airplanes that we're flying, right? Even the military recognizes this. And I think they're, in some cases, they will only allow their pilots to be current in 2 or 3 airplanes at any given time, which makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
And so yes, so we have a lack of, I'll call it fine motor skill, because we're not doing it all the time. We also have this jack of all trades, because we are jumping in a lot of different airplanes through the course of a day or even a week. And then at the same time, maybe our own background skills aren't up to the task, right? And the classic one here is flight instructors just don't have a lot of true experience with additional stall spin dynamics, even though they've been signed off as competent to teach in that realm. And so the margins for error, even with the instructor on board in the stall spin realm, is a lot smaller.
Yeah. I think one of the things I commonly catch instructors who are commonly sitting in the right seat watching, they're very good at nitpicking and everything else, but when you put them in the left seat or just get them to do everything from the right, it's those muscle memory actions. And usually the first one is after takeoff. If we've taken off with flaps, the flaps are still down. That's usually the first thing they forget, and all this other stuff. So I think that's where, again, it's just that hands-on approach. Like I've mentioned in many podcasts, I was very fortunate that I had a great mix of hands-on charter flying, joy flights, aerobatic joy flights, all that sort of stuff, as well as teaching. So my skills remain polished, and I got that opportunity. Whereas so many cadet style academies and those sort of flight schools don't get that chance to hone their skills and keep current. It's really just always the student flying, apart from maybe the occasional demonstration.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. And the other point you bring up is that at some of those schools where the instructors are homegrown, they don't really get a chance to get outside of that bubble and experience other types of flying and other types of weather, or even other types of airplanes for that matter. And yet now maybe they're called on to get in an airplane they've never been in, right? And so, yeah, all of those different things are happening. In fact, I learned a long time ago not to try to demonstrate anything, because usually I end up having to say, well, you know what I mean. But
that was what not to do.
Yeah, right. So, and I tell students nowadays, look, every time I take the control, something bad happens and you have to recover from it. So you don't want me to fly the airplane.
Yeah, nice cover.
Right.
That's amazing, mate. Look, there's so much great information there. And like I said, we could talk so much longer, but just a really great overview of everything and really what's coming up. So you've written several books, many articles and that sort of thing. But one book that Pilot Train have sort of published, I guess you can call it the Australian version. It's been reprinted, and that is the your Stall Spin Awareness book, which will be available at the upcoming seminar. So do you want to just tell us about how that book came about and what readers can get out of that, and then we'll start to wrap things up.
Sure. So the Stall Spin Awareness book was the second book of the group. The first one being Emergency Maneuver Training, and Pilot Train is actually going to come out with the Australian version of the Emergency Maneuver Training book over the next month or a couple of months anyway. But the Stall Spin book really takes a historical view of our knowledge of the stall spin regime. And it starts with the Wright brothers and goes all the way through the publication date of the book, which was 2007. And so I tried to put together all of the information. It's a fairly detailed read in terms of being a theoretical treatise of how we know what we know, and dealing with a lot of the myths and misunderstandings surrounding the topic. And so it's about 500 pages. And all of my books take about 70 years at a time, because I'd rather be doing anything but write. So I don't know how you are with your writing, but I got to mow the lawn, I'll do that, or I got to go have a root canal. Yeah, I'll have a root canal instead of sitting down. But anyway, I'm really pleased that it's now available, because I don't sell these books outside of the U.S. anymore. It was just a little complicated process for me. So I'm glad that Pilot Train has decided to take that role on, and it really came about from Anderson Aviation, who they bring in the Bristol aircraft, and I believe they include my books with the purchase of the aircraft. So that's how it's all fell out there. And I know a lot of the pilots in Australia over the years. I've flown with some of them. David Pilkington, of course. I wrote the forward to his Aerobatics Down Under book, and I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of those folks in person.
No, it is. Well, look, I've got mine here, so I'll be bringing it with me to get you to sign it. Right. And yeah, I've only just got it, so I haven't had a chance to read much of it yet, but I will before we get together.
All right.
No, that's fantastic. So that is available on Pilot Train, and I will include the link in the description for this episode, guys, if you want to get yourself a copy, and Jonty there will send it straight out to you. All right, Rich, look, thank you again. So much fantastic information. It's just been an absolute privilege, and I hope everyone listening has got something out of it. Just to wrap up, what do you think is probably the hardest aircraft you've flown to stall and spin, and then the most difficult one that you've had to try and recover? Have you had a bit of a scare?
Sure. The hardest airplane to spin is the spins approved part of the Cessna 172. I call it a spin.
Agree.
I call it a spin reluctant airplane, even though spins are approved there. It is reluctant. Although if you do the simulated skidding base to final turn, it'll snap roll inverted every single time. So it just depends how you're managing it.
And this is the N and the M models that have that utility category spin approval for
Yes.
those listening. Going, you can't spin a 172.
Right. Right. I would say I haven't had any airplane because I'm not a test pilot, right? I let them do all the heavy lifting. If they say it's approved for spins, I'll do it. And I would say they all fit within the same bell curve, right? They're all in that same normal spin behavior. So none of them have scared me. When I get into airplanes like the home builds, the RVs, because no two are ever the same. I'm pretty cautious about it. I might do a quarter turn build up to a full turn, usually no more than a turn and a quarter. But so far, knock on wood, all the ones that I've spun have been well built and behaved normally. The only two times I ever got scared in spin recovery, two different airplanes, two different pilots, totally different levels of experience. One was in a decathlon with a private pilot who froze on the controls just momentarily, and I was able to talk him out of it, so I didn't have to intervene. The other one was an Army test pilot from Edwards Air Force Base uh, with the first experience doing an inverted flat spin in a pits, and froze on the controls and was able to talk that pilot out of it as well. So it's much less about the airplane behavior and more about the software that you plug into the seat. Two totally different levels of experience, two different airplanes, but it's the human factor, isn't it? And if it's a novel situation, doesn't matter what your prior experience is. If you've never been in it before, it's going to take your breath away potentially.
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting one because, as you know, I liken it to taxiing sometimes when an airplane, we're trying to turn left and it's not going left enough. So for some reason, they let go of the left, trying to push a right rudder, or just, I don't know, there's something going on down there. And spinning's the same. You know, you got to hold everything forward. And if you've done 10 spins, well, you're going to do another 5 half spins to get out of it, kind of thing. You're always going to do half as many solid spins as you are to exit. And it's just learning that patience and waiting. You just got to hold the rudder in until the desired effect happens out the front window, isn't it?
Yeah. So be confident in the procedure, follow the procedure, and then in some cases you have to wait. And I tell people, look, the first 1,000 spins are the hardest.
Yeah.
They get easier after that.
Not because you didn't make it, just, I mean, if you do that many.
Before everything clicks in and, oh, this is just another day at the office.
Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. All right, look, Rich, let's talk about the conference coming up. So June 28th, we have the UPRT Conference in Caboolture in Queensland. I've mentioned it a couple of times now, and we are so fortunate to have you coming down to talk. So on the 28th, you'll be talking, and then if we can get your certificate of validation sorted and everything else, there'll be an opportunity to fly with you on the Saturday and Sunday. So and this is June 28th to 30th in Caboolture Aero Club,
yes,
in Queensland. So what can you, what can people expect? Why do we have to be there?
Sure. So the optimal training strategy has an academic piece, it has a simulation piece, and it has an on aeroplane piece, right? And so the first day is just going to be a day-long workshop where we're going to get together with as many pilots as we can fit in the room, I suppose, and just take a different approach to the usual topics and why pilots are getting into trouble. And we haven't invented any new ways to have accidents. It's the same recurring 2 or 3 or 4 themes, right? So we're gonna take a different point of view on a lot of those and try to expand the participants' understanding and how they view flying and what 3-dimensional freedom with an airplane really means. And it doesn't matter whether you're a student pilot or a flight instructor. It should benefit both of those kinds of audiences. And then we have certainly a lot fewer slots available to go out and do some flying and again, do some things that are probably a little different from the standard way of doing things, but that are designed to really open up the pilot's experience and understanding about flying and the whole three-dimensional aspect of it. And as long as you can understand my U.S. English, I think we'll be just fine.
Haven't had any trouble so far. Yeah, so look, it'll be a fantastic chance. So it doesn't matter whether you're a student pilot, private pilot, commercial pilot, established instructor. We're going to have some workshops throughout the day for both groups, and very loosely talk about the training aspects versus the flying aspects. But there's something for everyone to learn from, including myself. Like I keep telling people, it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this for. There is always something to learn and get out of it. So really, really looking forward to that. So you can go to UPRTconference.com. Tickets are available now. They're only $99 to listen to this man speak, an absolute bargain. And like I said, books and things will also be available to purchase, and watch the flying and things on the weekend and just network and get together.
Sounds good, Trent. And I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss, talk shop a little bit between us. And I'm looking forward to meeting you and a whole bunch of other pilots there in Australia.
Definitely. All right, Rich, let's wrap it up. If there's one airplane that you could fly that you haven't, what would it be?
P-51 Mustang. I was that close, and the weather came in and shut us down. I was that close.
You'd have to be in the right country for it. Like we used to have one in Perth. It was part of a collection, but unfortunately was sold. There's one couple over east, but yeah, definitely an airplane I'd love to get into as well.
One of these days.
Yeah. And everything you have flown, what would you say is your favorite?
I'd have to just fall back to the decathlon, although I have been toying with the idea of a J3 Cub just to get back to the most rudimentary flying possible.
Yeah,
it's all good.
There is something special about it, isn't it? It's just, it does. It reminds you of why we started all this caper in the first place. And, sometimes it can become a job, a routine and that, but what we do is so special. I haven't flown the Cub yet. I want to get on floats and fly it down in Adelaide. Hopefully doing that at some point. I haven't organised it yet, but it's.
You'll have a blast, I'm sure.
Let's combine the two. Yeah. All right, Rich. Thank you so much again for your time, mate. We'll see you in June, and no doubt we'll talk plenty before the event as we formulate things more and make it an amazing week of aviation. So thanks again for joining me.
Thank you. See you all soon.
Thank you very much, Rich Stowell, for just a fantastic chat. And guys, I can't recommend enough. If you're able to get yourself to Caboolture, the 28th of June, 2024, can I strongly recommend you do so, to spend just a full day of listening to this man speak, just $99. A briefing costs more than that, and you're going to get a whole day of the insights from this man, and we're going to have some fantastic discussions there. I'll be there. Paul Strike's going to be there hosting, and let's get behind Paul, guys. It's a great expense to get Rich down here, and this is why I've jumped on board to support the event, to make sure it's a success. We've got a lot of other fantastic operators and airline pilots, check and training, 135 operators, etc., that have already indicated they're coming as well. And it'll be a fantastic opportunity to network, get a taste of what's going on, and participate. We are looking also to potentially live stream the event, but right now the 100% way to listen to Rich speak is by being there in person. So UPRTconference.com, get on there, grab your tickets now. There will be limited space, I can assure you of that. And the 29th and 30th, there will be limited opportunities to do a 1-hour flight lesson with Rich. The certificate of validation looks like it's all under control at the moment, and it should be a happening thing. And what a privilege it would be to fly with him, and again, just to get some insight into all the stuff that he's done and written about. Books will be available. If you want to get onto Pilot Train, you can Google that. Links will all be in the description, and grab a copy of his book. They'll also be available at the conference as well. And of course, as I've said, following that on the Monday and Tuesday, July 1st and 2nd, will be the industry conference, which will be for all first job operators, airline operators, check-in trainers, head of operations, fly instructors, anyone that wants to come along, make a difference, have a look at the issues that are going on with the implementation of UPRT training, as well as the standards of commercial pilots that we are producing right now and the things that we can do to fix those issues. It's going to be a fantastic 2 days. It's going to be some fantastic networking and workshops again there, and some real brainstorming. And we'll be presenting all that. It's not just going to be a 2-day event. Nothing happens. We're going to be taking all this information to CASA and other agencies to really make some pushes, and also promoting some other alternative options to help fill the void and get this training up and running. So very excited about that. And as always, keep listening for more information. All right, that's long enough. Thank you for sticking with me. 1 hour, 20 odd minutes. So let's wrap things up. You all be safe, blue skies, and as always, remember the golden rule: aviate, navigate, communicate. Cheers, everyone.